What if the Grand Canyon is not a wonder of nature, but a gigantic stone vault hiding a history too dangerous for the textbooks? Millions of tourists come here for the red cliffs, the beautiful sunsets, and the dizzying views. They photograph the abyss, admire the scale, look down, and never suspect that the real question is not above ground, but deep beneath it. Hundreds of caves, restricted zones, missing coordinates, an old newspaper sensation, and the name Kincaid, the man who, according to the legend, may have stumbled upon something inside the Grand Canyon that could make official history crack open. Egyptian traces in the heart of America, underground halls, inscriptions, statues, and tunnels that people later preferred to discuss in whispers. Why was this story declared a hoax so quickly? And why, after more than a century, has it still not disappeared? Today, we are going where tourist routes do not lead. Not into a pretty postcard, but into a closed case with too many coincidences, too much silence, and too few honest answers. Watch until the end, because the details ahead may change the way you look at the Grand Canyon forever. But the real alarm does not begin at the edge of the cliff, where tourists photograph the red rocks. It begins lower, beneath the layers of stone, where the Grand Canyon stops being a beautiful landscape and turns into a closed underground system. Officially, more than 300 caves are known there, but even that number sounds like a cautious formula, as if we are being shown only the corner of a much larger map. Beneath the canyon, there may be voids, corridors, halls, and passages that an ordinary visitor will never hear about. Not because they are boring, not because there is nothing to search for, but because access is restricted, routes are not advertised, and parts of the territory remain outside normal human view for years. This refers to the main question. If the Grand Canyon hides hundreds of underground cavities, why do we still speak about it only as a natural wonder? Why is it shown from above, from safe viewing platforms, while almost no one talks about what may lie below? The convenient picture for tourists is rocks, sunlight, and a breathtaking abyss. The inconvenient picture is a stone archive where unnecessary witnesses are not welcome. And this is where the story becomes uncomfortable for the official version. Because a network of caves is not just a geological detail. It is a possible storage place for traces, objects, inscriptions, and routes that could challenge the familiar story of America's past. If there truly is a hidden world beneath the Grand Canyon, then this is no longer just a landscape. It is a gigantic underground archive, sealed under the mask of a natural monument. In 1909, a message rang out through this stone silence that should have made the respectable academic world stop talking, at least for a moment. A publication in the Arizona Gazette told the story of a man named Kincaid, connected to the Smithsonian Institution, who allegedly discovered not just a cave in the Grand Canyon, but an entire underground complex. Not a crack in the rock, not a random hollow, not another geological trick of nature, but a system of halls, tunnels, and chambers where, according to the description, objects with an Egyptian trace were found. And this is where the real scandal begins, not the pretty tourist postcard with a red sunset. Because this story included statues, bas-reliefs, inscriptions, a hidden entrance behind a sheer cliff, an underground lake, and crystals described as if they gave off their own light. That is too heavy a set of details for a boring little tale, too dangerous a set of images for a calm textbook. If even part of this description was true, the Grand Canyon stopped being just a canyon and became a place where a bomb could be lying under official history. This refers to the most explosive question. What were Egyptian motifs doing in the heart of America? Who brought those forms, those symbols, those strange traces of a foreign civilization there? For decades, we were taught to see the ancient world as a collection of separate cultures, divided by oceans, distances, and primitive possibilities. But one such discovery, if real, breaks that convenient order like a thin glass display case. Official history loves neat lines. These people lived here, those people lived there. They did not reach this place. They did not cross that ocean. Such contacts could not have happened. But in this story, the Grand Canyon behaves like an insolent witness who suddenly pulls evidence from his pocket and places it on the table. Egyptian artifacts in America are not just a curiosity. They are a direct challenge to the familiar scheme of who contacted whom, who reached which lands, and how many pages of ancient history were shown to us in a shortened version. That is exactly why the Kincaid story refuses to disappear. Not because people simply want a beautiful tale about secret caves, but because it contains a core that makes the official version uncomfortable. Beneath the ground, there may have been traces of a world where ancient civilizations were connected far more closely than we are allowed to think. And if that connection existed, then the question is no longer whether the Grand Canyon is beautiful. The question is, who decided, and when, that certain discoveries should be declared impossible? This refers to the most uncomfortable part of the whole affair. If the publication was fiction, why was it so precise, so dense, and so persistent? Why, decades later, do people still search for the entrance, discuss coordinates, compare the names of cliffs, remember the Smithsonian Institution, and argue about a cave that was officially dismissed almost with a single phrase? A simple newspaper fantasy usually burns out fast. This story did not burn out. It became a splinter in the body of the official past. In this plot, Kincaid looks not merely like a traveler, but like a man who, for 1 second, opened the door to a forbidden archive. Behind that door, according to the description, there were not dinosaur bones and not pretty minerals, but traces of a culture that was not supposed to be there. That is why this story is dangerous. It does not add one more mystery to the Grand Canyon. It asks a nasty, inconvenient question. What if the history of America was once found underground and then very quickly ordered to be treated as non-existent? If this is true, history textbooks would not need a correction. They would need to be rewritten from the first page. Because Egyptian symbols in the depths of the Grand Canyon would mean that the ancient world was not a closed cage, but a vast network of roots, knowledge, and contacts. And then this is not a legend for lovers of sensational stories. It is the trace of a huge gap in official memory, a gap too conveniently covered with the word hoax. The cave itself is not the truly uncomfortable part. The stone corridors, the underground halls, and even the strange publication in an old Arizona newspaper are not the real danger. The danger begins with the conclusion: if Egyptian statues, bas-reliefs, and inscriptions really existed inside the Grand Canyon, then the ancient world was not arranged the way textbooks have calmly presented it for decades. It means oceans may not have been walls, but roads. It means civilizations may have known far more about each other than we were told with a straight face. The official version loves simplicity. Egypt is over there. America is over here. Between them, there are vast waters, primitive vessels, impossible routes, and a neat full stop at the end of the paragraph. Very convenient. But the moment Egyptian traces appear in the heart of North America, that tidy scheme no longer looks like solid history. It begins to look like a cage too small for the past. This refers to the most painful point in the entire story. If ancient peoples really could cross great distances, build routes, exchange knowledge, and leave traces where they were not supposed to be, then one small theory does not collapse. The whole familiar order begins to crack, the order in which ancient humanity must remain slow, limited, and chained to its own territory. That is why the Kincaid story is dangerous, not because of a dramatic legend about a secret cave. A secret cave by itself would not frighten anyone so much. The dangerous part is what was allegedly inside it. Statues, bas-reliefs, inscriptions, foreign symbolism in a place where official history did not expect it. Such objects do not simply decorate a museum display. They ask a dirty, inconvenient question. Who came there first? Who saw all of this? And who later decided that silence would be safer? And this is where the scandalous split begins between official history and forbidden archaeology. Official history demands evidence, and that is fair. But when the story around a discovery is surrounded by missing coordinates, a sharp denial, and restricted access, the question becomes larger. Where does scientific caution end, and where does the protection of a convenient version of the past begin? This refers not only to the Grand Canyon. Stories like this always strike the same nerve. When a discovery appears that does not fit the approved scheme, it can be called a mistake, a hoax, a coincidence, or a fantasy. And that is it. The case is closed. But is it really closed if people keep searching, arguing, comparing details, and returning to the old publication again and again? Egyptian artifacts in America are not a small sensation for fans of strange stories. They are a possible key to a different map of the ancient world. A map where seas did not separate civilizations, but connected them. A map where knowledge could travel across continents, symbols could move, and traces could vanish, not because they never existed, but because admitting them would be too inconvenient. And if such an underground complex really existed in the depths of the Grand Canyon, then the main question starts to sound almost like an accusation. Why was it not shown to the world? Why was no major scientific expedition opened? Why were the artifacts not presented, the detailed reports not published, the discovery not turned into the greatest archaeological event of the century? Or was it not turned into one precisely because it was too dangerous for the familiar picture of the past? This refers to the harshest conclusion. The cave does not break history. What may have been inside the cave breaks history. If Egyptian traces in the Grand Canyon were real, then the official version of the ancient world is incomplete, trimmed down, and far too convenient for those used to keeping the past under lock and key. That is why the Kincaid story does not look like an ordinary newspaper tale that can be brushed off the table and forgotten. It looks like a splinter that the official version has never managed to pull out. Because behind it stands not the question of whether one mysterious cave existed. Behind it stands a much more dangerous question. How many more such traces lie under layers of stone, sand, archival dust, and polite academic prohibitions? The publication in the Arizona Gazette landed like a fist on the table. Egyptians in America, an underground complex inside the Grand Canyon, statues, bas-reliefs, inscriptions, a hidden entrance, tunnels and chambers beneath the red cliffs. For official science, This was not merely uncomfortable, it was almost indecent, because such a story did not ask for a small correction in a textbook. It demanded that the neat scheme of the ancient world be torn down and discussed from the beginning. That is exactly why the reaction looks so sharp. Instead of a loud expedition, instead of a public investigation, instead of showing the artifacts and opening a serious scientific debate, there came a cold denial. The Smithsonian Institution declared the story a hoax. That was it. No artifacts, no coordinates, no underground hall, no Egyptian traces. Case closed, move along, nothing more to see. This refers to the most suspicious point in the entire story. When a discovery is so large that it could change the understanding of the past, it cannot simply be erased with one short phrase. If it is fiction, show exactly where the lie is. If it is a mistake, explain who made it. If it is a newspaper fantasy, why was it built with so much detail, with names, an institution, a route, and a description of an underground complex? But instead of clarity, there was a void, and that void became louder than any piece of evidence. Because where reports, diagrams, photographs, expedition notes, and calm academic explanations should have appeared, there remained a strange silence, a silence far too convenient. A silence that does not close the question, but makes it more poisonous. The official version loves the word hoax. What a convenient word. It works like a stamp on a folder. Place it there, and no one is required to dig through the details anymore. But there is one problem. Strong hoaxes are exposed with facts, not with an irritated gesture. The Kincaid story was not buried under evidence. It was pushed out of polite discussion and ordered to be treated as a ridiculous tale. This refers to the conflict between convenient history and forbidden archaeology. One side says, nothing happened, everything was invented, forget it. The other side asks a simple, crude, and uncomfortable question. If nothing happened, why has tension around this story lasted for so many years? Why was it never fully mocked, closed, dismantled in public debate, and thrown out of memory? A simple invention usually does not live long. It flares up, makes noise, then disappears under the weight of obvious refutations. But the Kincaid story behaves differently. It returns again and again because it contains something the official version never managed to neutralize. A publication too specific, a trace too loud, and a meaning too dangerous. And this is where the most uncomfortable part begins. The Smithsonian Institution could say, this did not happen, but it could not force people to stop asking questions. It could not remove the central image from their minds. Somewhere in the depths of the Grand Canyon, behind a sheer cliff, there may have been an entrance to an underground space containing traces of a civilization that was not supposed to be in America. This refers to the core of the scandal. It is not the newspaper that frightens official history, not Kincaid's name, not even the Grand Canyon itself. What frightens it is the possibility that, beneath layers of stone, someone once found not merely ancient objects, but proof of a connection between worlds that was later declared impossible. And if the publication was only a newspaper trick, why did it become so deeply lodged in memory? Why did enthusiasts search for the entrance for decades? Why did they discuss cliffs, coordinates, old maps, and archival lines? Why did one old article prove more durable than many official explanations? That is the real conflict. Officially, a fake. But after that, there were not fewer questions. There were more. Because denial without transparency does not look like a victory for science. It looks like a door slammed shut. And when a door is slammed too quickly, any normal person wants to ask, what exactly did they not want us to see? This is where the Grand Canyon stops being a beautiful abyss for tourist brochures and turns into a battlefield. On one side stands official science with its cold formula. There was no Kincaid cave, no underground complex, no Egyptian statues, bas-reliefs or inscriptions found in the heart of America. It was all a newspaper hoax, an old sensation, a noisy invention that should be left to lovers of cheap legends. Convenient? Far too convenient. On the other side stands forbidden archaeology, asking not polite questions, but very uncomfortable ones. If this was an empty newspaper tale, why has it held on for more than a century? Why are people still arguing, searching, comparing details, and returning to that old publication? Why does a story supposedly exposed long ago continue to live, as if an unextinguished fire is still burning beneath it? This refers to the main conflict of the entire story. The official version demands evidence, and in that it is right. But the problem lies elsewhere. When the coordinates, the artifacts, and access to the location all disappear together, we are no longer dealing with a simple lack of evidence. We are dealing with a suspicious void, neatly covered by the severe word, hoax. Science says, show the objects, show the entrance, show the reports. And that sounds logical. But forbidden archaeology answers more harshly. Who was supposed to preserve all of this if the first traces were declared non-existent almost immediately? Who was supposed to lead people to the entrance if the coordinates never became public? Who was supposed to present the artifacts if the story itself became toxic for the official office from the very beginning? That is why the Kincaid case irritates the calm picture of the past. It is not built on one fantastic image, but on a dangerous chain. A newspaper publication, the name of an explorer, the Smithsonian Institution, a description of underground halls, an Egyptian trace, and a sharp denial. Too many elements for an ordinary campfire horror story, and far too little openness for a subject that was officially declared closed once and for all. This refers to the very line where scientific caution begins to look like the protection of a convenient version. Yes, serious history cannot be built on rumors, but serious science should not hide behind one phrase when the subject is a discovery capable of overturning the understanding of the ancient world. If it was all fiction, dismantle it piece by piece. If it was a mistake, show how the mistake happened. If it was a forgery, present the full exposure, not a short stamp on a folder. But instead, we are left with a strange picture. On one side, official denial. On the other, restricted areas, missing coordinates, unconfirmed artifacts, and a legend that refuses to sink into dust. And the louder it is called an invention, the stronger the question becomes, why does it disappear so badly? Forbidden archaeology is dangerous not because it is always right. No, it contains enough trash, exaggeration, and beautiful inventions. But sometimes it strikes exactly where official history feels the most pain. At places with too many inconsistencies, too much silence, and too little transparency. The Kincaid story is exactly that kind of case. It does not prove everything at once, but it forces people to look where looking is uncomfortable. This refers to the central nerve of the Grand Canyon. If there was no cave, then why does this plot look like a closed case without a proper trial? Why, instead of a clear full stop, did we get fog, restrictions, arguments, and decades of searches? Why did one old newspaper article prove stronger than the official order to forget? And in this confrontation, the main danger is not that someone believes in a secret cave. The main danger is that the very possibility of such a cave destroys the overly tidy picture of the ancient world. Because if traces of a culture that was not supposed to be there were truly found beneath the Grand Canyon, then official history is not facing a legend. It is facing a piece of evidence that is easier to call impossible than to explain. Long before the newspaper sensation, long before Kincaid, long before the loud arguments about the Smithsonian Institution, the Grand Canyon was already not an ordinary place. For a tourist, it is an abyss, red cliffs, and a dramatic panorama. For the peoples who lived here for thousands of years, its depths looked different. A territory of prohibition, fear, and invisible force. In places like this, people did not simply walk across stone. They entered with caution, because the canyon was believed to answer a person in ways he did not expect. Indigenous peoples connected the depths of the canyon with special zones where one could not descend without the permission of spirits. In these traditions, the idea of a place without time appears, a place where ordinary human rules seem to stop working. This is not an archaeological report and not laboratory proof, but it is an important ancient background. The strangeness of the Grand Canyon did not appear yesterday, and not after the newspaper publication of 1909. It lived in the memory of those who knew this land long before tourist routes and federal signs. This refers to the hidden layer of the whole story. Sometimes a place first becomes forbidden in folk memory, and only later do official restrictions, protected paths, closed areas, and neat explanations appear around it. And here comes the uncomfortable question: why were the depths of the canyon so often described not as simple stone cavities, but as a space where a person risks stepping outside the ordinary world? On the canyon walls, there are rock images, traces of settlements, and memories of rituals that reach us today only in fragments. These traces do not say directly, Egyptian halls were here, statues stood here, forbidden history was hidden here. No, there is no cheap straight line like that. But they show something else. For centuries, the canyon was not perceived as dead stone, but as a living, dangerous, and sacred space. And that already matters. Because when old traditions say, do not go down there without reason, and centuries later, stories appear about closed caves, missing coordinates, and a strange discovery, coincidence begins to look far too convenient. Too many different voices point downward, not to the peaks, not to beautiful viewing platforms, not to tourist postcards, but exactly into the depth, to the place where the official map becomes poorer than rumor. This refers not to proof, but to the atmosphere of suspicion. Indigenous legends cannot be used as an iron document, but they also cannot be arrogantly thrown away as if ancient memory has no value. Sometimes a tradition preserves not the exact layout of a tunnel and not the coordinates of an entrance, but the central feeling. There is a place where a person should not intrude without cause. That is why this ancient layer strengthens the Kincaid story, but does not replace it. The newspaper publication gave the scandalous plot: an underground complex, Egyptian artifacts, statues and inscriptions. The traditions give something else: the sense that the underground zones of the Grand Canyon had long been seen as a realm where ordinary logic becomes weak. Not proof, but a disturbing background. Not evidence, but an ancient whisper behind the official version. The most curious thing about such legends is their persistence. They can be called superstition, they can be blamed on fear of nature, they can be waved away with the phrase, "People were simply afraid of a huge abyss." But why, then, does the image of forbidden depths fit so precisely with the modern story of inaccessible caves? Why does an ancient warning suddenly sound next to modern restrictions, almost like a brutal newspaper headline? "Do not go down. Not everything there belongs to you." This refers to the central nerve of the whole plot. The Grand Canyon frightens not only with its size, it frightens because one direction of fear has surrounded it for too long. Downward, beneath the stone, into closed passages, into places where people are not allowed to enter merely out of curiosity. And if traces of a foreign ancient culture were ever truly found there, then the old traditions no longer look like beautiful decoration. They begin to look like a warning no one wanted to read aloud. So the legends of indigenous peoples become not the main argument, but a heavy shadow around the main argument. They do not prove the Kincaid cave. They do not present statues and inscriptions to the world. But they make the very idea of forbidden depths much heavier, because it turns out that the Grand Canyon was seen as dangerous and unusual not only by modern seekers of sensations. It was seen that way by those who lived beside it long before newspapers, institutions, and official denials. Part of the Grand Canyon is closed to free access, and the official wording sounds familiar to the point of boredom. Public safety, protection of nature, preservation of a fragile ecosystem. On paper, everything looks noble, almost flawless. But place next to it the Kincaid story, the old publication about an underground complex and the rumors about hidden caves, and that smooth formula begins to creak. Because one thing is to protect rare plants and dangerous trails, and something very different is to keep under lock a place surrounded for more than a century by a legend about a discovery capable of overturning history. A restriction by itself proves nothing. Yes, in a huge canyon, there are dangerous areas, collapses, difficult routes, and zones where an unprepared person can easily get into trouble. But when a restriction is placed over territory connected with missing coordinates, underground halls, and stories of Egyptian traces, it stops looking like a normal safety measure. It begins to look like a lid on a box that no one has wanted to open for far too long. This refers to the most uncomfortable question. What exactly is being protected there? Nature? Tourists? Or something that may lie beneath layers of stone, sand, and century-old silence? The official version answers calmly, everything is for safety and the preservation of the park. But calmness does not always mean truth. Sometimes it means a well-practiced phrase for those who are not supposed to ask unnecessary questions. The Grand Canyon has long been turned into a controlled spectacle. Here is the viewing platform, here is the trail, here is the approved angle, here is the place where you can take a photograph and go home feeling that you have seen everything. But that is where the crude mockery hides. A person is shown the upper layer and then quietly taught that looking deeper is unnecessary, as if history ends where the tourist trail ends. If this were only about rocks, such an order would look natural. But this story carries a dangerous background. The publication of 1909, Kinkaid, the Smithsonian Institution, underground halls, Egyptian artifacts, a sharp denial, and missing coordinates. Against that background, every closed area takes on a completely different meaning. It is no longer just a risk zone, but part of a larger question no one is rushing to answer publicly. This refers to the conflict between protecting nature and controlling the past. Of course, the park must be protected from vandals, fires, trash, and foolish adventurers. But why, along with that, does such dense informational silence form around certain depths? Why can an ordinary person look at the canyon from above, yet know almost nothing about what is hidden below, behind closed routes and dry, prohibitive language? The most convenient power over the past is not a bonfire of books and not a loud ban. The most convenient power over the past is access by permits, closed zones, for safety reasons, for the protection of nature. Entry prohibited. It sounds soft, legal, and almost caring. But the result is the same. Unwanted eyes do not see. Unwanted hands do not touch. Unwanted questions receive no direct answer. And here the Kincaid story returns again, like a rusty needle under the nail. If there is nothing beneath the Grand Canyon, why does the subject of closed caves cling so nervously to official restrictions? If all of this is an old newspaper invention, why does every mention of inaccessible places immediately bring back the missing entrance, the underground halls, and the artifacts that were not supposed to exist? Too many coincidences have lined up into one dark line. This refers to the main suspicion. Sometimes a closed territory is not simply a place where people are not allowed to walk. Sometimes it is a way to control the very possibility of discovery. As long as the entrance is not found, there is no discovery. As long as the zone is closed, there is no verification. As long as there is no verification, the official version can calmly repeat, "Nothing happened." That is why the question sounds harsh, almost accusatory. What is being protected in the depths of the Grand Canyon? Stone, silence, tourists, or a past too dangerous to bring into the open? Because a place connected with a legend about a discovery capable of rewriting history can no longer be seen as an ordinary natural park. Every restriction there looks not like a full stop, but like a keyhole. And the louder they speak of safety, the stronger the desire to ask, safety for whom? People above, or the version of history hidden below? Later, as often happens with forbidden places, stories of lights, strange objects, and almost fantastic portals stuck to this case. Mysterious glows were seen over Arizona. Shapes appeared in the sky that did not fit ordinary explanations, and lovers of loud theories quickly tied all of it to the Grand Canyon. So another shell of the legend appeared, as if something strange was happening above the canyon, while an entrance to another space was hidden in its depths. But here, cheap UFO dust must not cover the main trace. The real mystery is not in the sky over Arizona. The real mystery is underground, where, according to the old publication, there may have been halls, tunnels, inscriptions, and traces of a civilization for which official history left no place. This refers to the most dangerous turn of the plot. Lights can be blamed on exercises, atmosphere, witness mistakes, or a beautiful mass legend. But a missing cave, Egyptian artifacts, and restricted access are no longer just a glow in the night sky. They are a question about a past that may not have been explained, but hidden. There is one more detail in the Grand Canyon that should not be turned into the main argument, but also should not be passed over too calmly. In its stone layers, there is a break often described with an almost newspaper-like, almost provocative phrase, "the missing billion years." It sounds as if someone opened the enormous book of the earth and tore out an entire part of it, leaving behind a rough stone scar instead of pages. Dry geology explains it through layers, erosion, ancient processes, and long periods when nature worked without witnesses. But for a person looking at the Grand Canyon not as a classroom diagram, but as a place with a suspiciously complicated story, this anomaly sounds different. Sandstone about 500 million years old lies next to schist, estimated at roughly 1.5 billion years old. Between them is not simply a difference, between them is a gigantic emptiness of time. This refers not to direct proof of Kincaid's cave and not to Egyptian artifacts. One cannot cheat here and pretend that a geological gap by itself proves the existence of a forgotten civilization. No, that would be cheap manipulation. But as a symbol, as a disturbing background, as the image of a place where even stone looks incomplete, this missing billion years works mercilessly. Because the Grand Canyon already looks like a cut through a massive archive. Each layer is like a line, each ledge like an old record, each color in the rock like a mark from a past that has long gone into the depths. And suddenly, inside this archive, there is a gap. Not a small note in the margin, not a scratch on a page, but an emptiness so vast that the question itself becomes uncomfortable. If the Earth has torn out pages here, why could human history not have them too? Official science will say, do not mix geology with archaeology, and formally it will be right. But only formally. Because what matters here is not a schoolroom argument about layers, but the larger image. This place too often looks like a territory of gaps, restrictions, and unfinished explanations. A gap in the stone, a gap in the Kincaid story, a gap in the coordinates, a gap again in access to the caves. This refers to the very atmosphere of the canyon. Everything here seems built around missing fragments. Where are the reports? Where is the entrance? Where are the objects described in the old newspaper? Where is the open verification? Where is the honest, full stop after which one could say, the case is closed? Instead, there are stone layers, restricted zones, careful formulas, and a legend that refuses to sink into archival dust. That is why the missing billion years should not be presented as sensational evidence. It should be presented as the dark metaphor of the entire Grand Canyon. As if nature itself is showing people that the past does not always lie before us as a neat stack of documents. Sometimes it is torn, incomplete, burned by time, and covered so tightly that later people can argue even about whether the trace itself ever existed. Now place two pictures side by side. In one, there is a stone chronicle with an enormous gap. In the other, there is a story about an underground complex that was quickly declared a hoax, leaving behind more questions than answers. And what do we get? The Grand Canyon again stops looking like a simple natural backdrop and becomes a place where too much disappears, exactly when it should have become the most important evidence. This refers to the final tension of the whole subject. The stone is silent, the archives are silent, the closed routes are silent, the official formulas sound neat and cold. But the logic of these gaps shouts louder than any sensation. If there is a torn-out chapter in the geological memory of the Earth here, why are we so confidently told that the memory of humanity is written honestly, evenly, and without missing pages? And again, everything returns to Kincaid. Not to campfire myths, not to pretty tales for tourists, not to UFO dust over Arizona, but to one old publication that struck too loudly against the calm picture of the past. There was a newspaper sensation. There was the name of an explorer. There was the Smithsonian Institution. There were descriptions of underground halls, tunnels, statues, bas-reliefs, and Egyptian inscriptions in the very heart of the Grand Canyon. Then everything seemed to fall into a crack between stone layers. The story was declared a hoax. The coordinates never became public. The artifacts were never presented to the world, and the entrance itself remained a ghost on the edge of official memory. A convenient ending? Far too convenient. Because real exposures usually bring clarity, while here, after the denial, there were only more questions. This refers to the main suspicion in the whole story. It was not so much dismantled and disproved as pushed into the shadows. The public was not shown a full analysis. Everything was not laid out piece by piece. No iron full stop was given, after which arguing would be foolish. A stamp was simply placed on it. Hoax. As if that should have been enough for everyone. But it was not enough, because too many details cling to each other like links in one unpleasant chain. First, the publication in the Arizona Gazette, then the underground complex, then Egyptian motifs that officially had no place in America, then the sharp denial, then restricted zones, careful wording, and strange silence around the canyon's depths. If this is a simple newspaper tale, why does it look like a case with its most important pages torn out? Where is the open verification? Where is the calm explanation that removes every question? Where is the public map of the error, clearly showing, here they invented, here they distorted, here they confused, here they deceived? This refers to the most uncomfortable logic of the entire plot. When one element disappears, it can be called coincidence. When the coordinates, the objects, the entrance, the reports, and the possibility of independent verification all disappear, it begins to smell less like a mistake and more like managed silence. And the colder the official denial sounds, the louder the forbidden version rustles behind it. Something was seen, something was understood, and then someone decided it would be better hidden. Of course, no one is required to believe every old newspaper sensation. Stories like this contain enough smoke, exaggeration, and cheap glitter. But that is precisely why a strong refutation must be transparent, detailed, and ruthless. It must close the door so completely that no crack, no whisper, no question remains behind it. Here the door was slammed shut, but the crack remained. And through that crack, too much is still visible. The Grand Canyon can be seen turning from a natural monument into a suspicious archive. The caves can be seen ceasing to be ordinary voids and becoming possible storage places of the past. The Kincaid story can be seen changing from an old newspaper absurdity into an uncomfortable question. What if the official version did not win, but simply removed the subject from open discussion? This refers to the harshest conclusion before the finale. Too many coincidences for a simple tale. Too little transparency for a final exposure. The subject was closed too quickly, considering that, if confirmed, it could have struck not one museum and not one scientific article, but the entire familiar map of the ancient world. That is why this story does not look buried. It looks hidden. Between the red cliffs, the closed routes, the missing coordinates, and the official formulas, one question still stands, impossible to brush aside. If nothing was found in the Grand Canyon, why does this emptiness look so much like a place where something far too important once lay? And now, the final question remains, the one that turns this entire story from a pretty legend into a dirty, heavy case without a closed file. If the Kincaid story was an ordinary hoax, why has it not disappeared from conversations, searches, and arguments for more than a century? Why does one old newspaper publication still sound louder than many calm explanations. Why was it never buried so completely that no one would return again to those underground halls, Egyptian statues, bas-reliefs, and inscriptions in the depths of the Grand Canyon? Officially, everything is simple. Nothing happened, the cave was not found, the artifacts were not presented, there are no coordinates, and the story was declared a hoax. But it is exactly this simplicity that looks too smooth, too convenient, too much like a lid slammed shut from above. If the case is closed, why does it still smell not of a final answer, but of something left unsaid? This refers to the main anxiety of the entire plot. The Grand Canyon may not be just a natural wonder, not just a beautiful wound in the body of America, not just a tourist shrine with red cliffs and viewing platforms. It may be a vault in which a history dangerous to textbooks, museums, and calm academic schemes has been locked away. Because if this story is true, then we are not facing a legend for lovers of strange sensations. We are facing a keyhole into a past someone very much does not want to open. Behind that keyhole may lie the answer to a question the official version does not like to hear. How connected was the ancient world, and how many roots, contacts, and traces simply never entered the approved picture? Egyptian artifacts in the Grand Canyon are not a decorative detail for a mysterious video. They are a possible blow against the very structure of familiar history. If ancient symbols, statues, and inscriptions really appeared in the heart of North America, then this is not a random oddity. It is a challenge to the entire story of who could reach where, who could contact whom, and who left traces where they were supposedly never meant to exist. This refers to the most dangerous conclusion. History would not need a small correction, not a footnote at the end of a textbook, not a careful update to one chapter. It would have to be rewritten from the first page, because such a discovery would change not one separate fact, but the map of the ancient world itself. That is exactly why there is so much fog around this story. An old newspaper, a loud sensation, a sharp denial, missing coordinates, restricted zones, indigenous legends, underground voids, and a stone archive where even geology looks like a book with torn-out pages. Too many coincidences for a simple tale. Too much silence for a final exposure. Too many restrictions for a place where supposedly there is nothing to search for. People can say as much as they want that all of this is fiction. They can repeat the word hoax until it begins to sound like an order. But one thing remains in place. The Grand Canyon still looks at man not like a landmark, but like the closed mouth of the past. And somewhere in that depth, the question still stands, a question no one has answered calmly and finally. This refers to the final line. If Kincaid's cave never existed, then we are facing one of the most persistent newspaper stories of the 20th century. But if it did exist, if beneath the red cliffs there really were halls, tunnels, and traces of a foreign ancient culture, then official history did not face a fantasy. It faced a piece of evidence that was easier to call impossible than to bring into the light. And that is why the Grand Canyon can no longer be seen only as a wonder of nature. Too much in it is hidden beneath the surface: stone, time, rumors, restrictions, and questions. Perhaps tourists see only the upper layer, the postcard, the safe angle, the permitted beauty. But the real story lies lower, in the dark, where tourist routes do not work and where the past still waits for someone willing to open that stone door. If this story is true, then we are not facing a legend. We are facing a keyhole into a past someone very much does not want to open. And while the entrance remains unfound, while the documents stay silent, while the closed zones remain closed, the Grand Canyon will keep its most dangerous question. What exactly is hidden beneath America's greatest abyss? An empty invention or proof of a civilization erased from history? And if, after all this, you are left with that one uncomfortable question, what is the Grand Canyon really hiding? Then this story has hit exactly where it should. Write in the comments, do you believe that traces of an ancient civilization could have been found beneath the canyon? Or is this just a convenient legend that can no longer be buried? Leave a like if you want more of these uncomfortable investigations. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next episodes. And make sure to hit the notification bell, because the next stories may be even sharper, even stranger, and even more dangerous for the official version of the past.